Hello, book people. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Shay. The channel is MsMalcolmHughes, where we believe that books are sometimes better than people. And today we are doing the long put off wrap up for April and May, tier ranking all of the books that I read. I read a number of books, so I'm going to break them up into categories. We're first going to start with romance, all different types of romance. Then we're going to move into nonfiction. Then, after that, we're going to get into children's fiction and finally graphic novels. Jumping right in, the first book that I want to discuss is Here Comes the Sun by Bella J. And so this was a cute little novella. It was about friends who become lovers. The main protagonist was originally a mean girl who treated the male main character like dirt in high school until he one day checked her. And ever since then, they've been locked in as best friends. Now, one day they sleep together, and he's always had a crush on her. He's always wanted her, but now he is on her and is ready for forever with her. So the next time she visits, he's like, give me this week. If this week goes well, you are moving here and it's us for life. Now she's a runner, and so she's low key scared, but eventually she gets over that and the story progresses. Overall, I thought this book was pretty good, but I did feel like the beginning needed to be fleshed out more for us to really see the history and build up of their relationship over time. I, at the very least, thought we needed to see them get to when they originally smashed and how it ended up impacting both of them emotionally. I thought that would have really transformed the story. I did like the tension between them towards the end of the novella. And though I did feel like the resolution needed more time to breathe, I feel like that could have been spaced out more. But overall, I wasn't mad that I read it. I thought it was a good palate cleanser type of read between books. And with all of that, I ended up giving this book a read when you have time. Now, the next book, y'all know I've been on a Jason Reynolds kick. And this one is titled 24 Seconds From Now by Jason Reynolds. And this is a YA romance. And so it's a love story, very heavy on the Black boys deserve love stories too. So I really appreciated that. We have Neon and Arya, and they are in the moment where they are prepared to take their romance to the next level. And the story in and of itself is how they got to this moment and all of the moments that have shaped this decision. And so I said that Jason Reynolds really likes to play with the concept of time and what happens in an expanse of time. And I say that because of the other book that I read from him. And then this one really playing on time. And I also think that Jason Reynolds just writes YA so well. Like it feels fully of that time. Wherever he places you, it feels like we're there. And with this story in particular, I said it's a very tender story. I found myself laughing a lot at the characters, especially those at the bingo hall. So Neon's family has a bingo hall that is actually named after him. And we get so many additional characters that breathe life into the story and really shape Neon. And so we get to know him more through those characters. Like I said, I was like, I really liked the real world of our main characters and the complexity of their families and their stories. I also like jumping through time based on 24. So we start with 24 seconds from now. And then we go back to 24 minutes from now. And then we go back to 24 weeks from now. Then we go back to 24 months from now, which is the inciting incident that starts us on this journey. And I do say though I appreciated that at some point I did really want us to go back to the bathroom with Neon and what he was thinking and wanted to know what was happening now. We eventually do get there, but I did want a little bit more time with that. I appreciate Jason Reynolds' writing. There's one line he says that goes, we meet in the middle of ourselves as ourselves. And I thought that was just a beautiful bar. I thought overall this was a beautiful story of seeing these two young people come together in the history. I also liked just their families and their background. I liked the eclecticness of Arya's family and her little sister and the painting of the house and the colors and the music and what that all meant. I really liked the story of Neon's grandparents. So, a lot of supporting characters here who had stories that I really loved. I did recommend that when you're reading the book to read the last paragraph out loud. I said that Jason Reynolds is a poet first, and poetry is meant to be heard. And so I really feel like that was poetic and should be read aloud. It really brings it home that way by reading it aloud. I said the intimacy seeps through even deeper. Again, a lot of robust characters. I like the different types of relationship dynamics in the book. I also joked, I said, not Neon's sister is out here living her best why choose life and dating with men throughout the week who all know about each other. Love the transparency there and just the willingness to explore and honesty. I think in relationships and like getting to know someone, I think just being honest from the jump can just completely open so many doors that so many people are scared to like delve into. And so they lie. But if you're just open and honest, who knows what the possibilities can be? I'd really like the stories between Neon's parents versus his grandparents and the mistakes and choices they made and the different types of advice that they gave Neon. I love that. I said the absence culturally of seeing and acknowledging the full emotions of young men, especially around romance and losing their virginity. I felt like this book was answering call to that. And I watched an interview, and Jason Reynolds was saying that this book came about because of him like pondering and working through his own manhood, what it has meant to him, and then having a conversation with friends about the losing of their virginities and what was that like for them. And so many of them were emotional behind it because no one had ever asked them that. And when you talk about sex with young men, it's often telling them what to do, how to be conquerors, and all these things, but not acknowledging the intimacy of it for them and recognizing that we're also shaping that experience and their understanding of romance and intimacy and what it should be. So I thought this was really good. I felt like every young person should read it. Also, as an adult, I found value in it. I've recommended it to men that I know, and I really just enjoyed it. I appreciate Jason Reynolds' writing in general. And when I met him in person, he seemed like a real chill dude. So that always is nice as well when we meet our like favorite writers and they seem like real chill people. And so overall, I ended up giving this book a read soon. Really enjoyed it. Next up, I want to talk about a book that completely surprised me. I actually was introduced to this writer because someone I'm connected with on Goodreads actually recommended that I read their other book, This Bitter Earth, and I have it. But if you know one thing about me and my reading, I really like to see the progression of writers. So I like to, whenever I can, start with their earlier works and then work my way up to their most recent ones. And this, along with This Bitter Earth, I believe that's the title, or Bitter, it's something. My mistake if it's wrong. But were really popular, the two most popular works. And so I started with this one, and that is The Thing About Home by Rhonda McKnight. It is a romance, but it also has historical fiction elements. Like I said, the romances that I read over these 2 months have been all over the place. And I've really enjoyed the experience of reading all different types of romance. But this one, oh, it starts off with Imagine that you are renewing your vows with your husband, you're excited. And then the day of, moments before you're slated to renew your vows, your husband tells you that he can no longer do this and he cannot remarry you. Like he doesn't care that X amount of people are there, that you're a very famous influencer and that you have brand deals. He's just like, I cannot even pretend and do it again. And so imagine how gut wrenching that would be, right? And so that's how we start off with our main character here. And then after that, it's like, what do I do now? Because she kind of goes on online to her audience and it's not pretty, right? She's losing followers. And so she decides to step back, take some time away, regroup, figure out what's next. She never really knew her father's side of the family. She is biracial. She was raised by her white mother. And so her father actually died very early. All of this is early on, so I'm not spoiling anything. But she decides to go south to South Carolina to reconnect with the family, or search for and hopefully connect with the family that she never got to know, her father's family. And that's really where our story starts once she goes down south to South Carolina from New York. And I said this book, just the lineage and legacy of it, I love the evolution of the story over time. I felt like our protagonist was faced with what felt like an impossible situation initially, but she does find her way. And I was like, I think that's seemingly the beauty of the story, of her finding her way, of us all finding our way. Her mother, I said, was a real piece of work. But I said, the human experience of love and loss is not easy. I felt like our protagonist's engagement with the love interest was awkward at times, but overall, it was really good. I like to watch it grow and mature. I thought this was a really solid read. I felt like there was so much about love and family and romance as well. My one con was that I did feel like the epilogue should have been longer because it didn't pull me into the emotions that could have been tapped into. That's what I felt. And I also liked the tidbit early on of her going home and trying to figure out where to stay. And when she finally meets her family, like, yeah, no, you can't stay there. That's a former plantation. She had no clue. They're like, no, you cannot stay there. And so they made sure that she had other accommodations, but they also made sure she understood the respect for the ancestors and why that couldn't happen. And thinking of like modern times and what's been happening, I thought that was so important. I just thought that this book was well done. It was a story that pulled me in. I never really wanted to get out of it, even when it was over. I was like, wow, I really enjoyed that. I really liked that story. They call it low country, right? I really enjoyed that low country read. I love the historical elements. I love watching our character expand and blossom and bloom over time. And so I was pulled in. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm definitely going to read the other book that I have by this author. And so, with all of that, I ended up giving this a read soon. The next book that I want to discuss is one from a series that I have been reading and am still reading. And this particular book is Capri 3.5 by Jaquel J. Again, another romance, this one more urban romance. And I cannot lie to you all, at some point, all of the books in this series start to like blend together and merge together in my mind. And so I did feel like this story, we continue to see Capri on her journey. As you know, she's a DA. She's now with Quamir. They've started their family. But what does that mean to hold all of those positions with people who are always wanting to annihilate, whether that is the Infernos or the Delgados, which is Capri's original family. So there's always drama, there's always violence, but there's always love and family here as well. And so I said that this book is where most open storylines get resolved. So there was a lot going on. Here we got a resolution to what was happening with Morgan. We also know what's happening with Rich in that storyline. Every storyline seems to be resolved except for Tuki. And that makes sense because he really has beef with Quasim. And so Quamir a little bit, but mostly Quasim. And so I figured that would continue within that series, that additional spin-off series. And I'm currently reading Quasim, so that is what's well, I'm currently reading Quasim 2, actually. And so that is what's happening. So we didn't see that get resolved. But everything else, Capri also has race in this book. So we have an additional child added to the family. Overall, I felt like it was a beautiful story. I said it didn't blow me away, but I did enjoy how it all came together and getting to know more of Skylar and Corleone and Jeffy, because that is a relationship that I'm really interested in. I really like the dynamic between them, how it's coming together. I wasn't sure about Corleone when he was first introduced. I was like, who is this character? How will it play out? But I got to know him initially when I read 10,000 Hours with a Rich Menace, and their relationship was more solidified there. And so I was always curious about them. But in reading these books, going back to the beginning of the series, in reading these books, I'm learning so much about their relationship, and I think it's beautiful. And so I actually want them to have their own series. We'll see what Jack Quill does. But as for Capri 3.5, I thought it was pretty good. And for that reason, I ended up giving this book a read soon. It was good. It was really good. But like I said, wasn't blown away to the point where it could have gotten a read now. And continuing on with that same series, with urban romance, we have Quasim 1 by Jack Quill J. In this one, we get to follow Blair and Quasim, who in the Capri books, we've seen them, kind of like toy around with the possibility, but never really touching it. And so in this one, we get to see them really working to figure it out. And here I did laugh because Blair's name is Blair Underwood. And I was like the actor, I thought that was funny. But I really did like the beginning of the book. I felt really bad for Quasim and everything that he had gone through with losing his partner and his child. And so in this book, we really got to see how all of this has been impacting Quasim. We understood that he was having a hard time with it. We saw that from Kwamir's perspective, but to actually see it from Quasim himself was a completely different level of visibility into what he's been going through. And I really appreciated and enjoyed it. As things continued to progress and we got to see what was going to happen with Quasim and Blair, I had in my notes, I said, the girls are not going to like this, but Q is pissing me off because he is unhealed and problematic. I said, how do you want to control everything and everyone around you when you can't even control and lead yourself? And so that was my big issue with Quasim here. I said, I'm sure that he will heal as the story progresses, and I get that for him. But it was a little frustration. It was a little frustrating initially. I did say that he's doing the right thing at one point for leaving Blair alone because if he's not ready to be what she needs, but I was like, also at the same time, he then needs to stop popping in and out because you can't have it both ways. I also think Jacquel is just like funny and she writes these characters with a lot of comedy. So at one point, Blair says things. I'm like, why would Blair say that? And I was like, just let that man blow your back out in peace. So when you read the book, that'll make sense. Overall, I said the book was cool. I said Blair and Quasim are low key in a toxic relationship. But I was like, but those are sometimes the couples that make it all the way. So at the end of the book, it does seem that they're going to be together. It was a good cliffhanger at the end of the book. I will give Jacquel that. She does do cliffhangers well. But because where I am in the series and I know that the series continues, I knew that the most dire result wasn't going to be the one that would happen here. So overall, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good intro back to the world. I do find myself missing these characters when I dip out of the world and dip into other books to give myself a break, but I do. I always come back to them. I'm like, "Ah, I miss my boys. I wonder what they're up to. I miss my girls. I wonder what they're up to." And so that's why I'm currently reading Quasim 2. But as far as Quasim 1, what I ended up giving this was a read when you have time. Good introduction, but not my favorite writing from Jackwell. And mostly I think I'm biased because Quasim was pissing me off. Okay, here I got to dip my toes back into one of my other favorite series, which is The Art of Hood Love by Antoinette Sherrill. And this one, it was a novella or mic checks, as she has titled them, these short novellas about the artists that are being signed to Relic Records. We get their backstories. And with this one, we have Saucy by Antoinette Sherrill. Again, urban fiction. And so this one, I was like, she looks like Kaylani with the addiction of Amy Winehouse. That is who Saucy is. I thought that it was a really engaging story that I wasn't anticipating, learning about what happened to her, the background with her brother, her family, the relationships that she had, how we got to the point when we first met her and the guy that she was with at the time, understanding that codependency there. And so I didn't know where or how Antoinette Sherrill was going to spin that story, but I actually really ended up enjoying it. I said, Saucy has a story on her and it's understandable. Once you know more of her background and her story, you see how she got to where she is when we meet her. I will say that for me, the big event, I did kind of see it happening early on once I got into it, but it still made sense. And it definitely made you empathize and understand how Saucy ended up where she is today, the just trauma that she's experienced, and how it's shaped all of her entire life. So I ended up really enjoying it. I thought that it was fantastic work. Y'all know, The Art of Hood Love is one of my favorite series, and I felt like these mic checks were just so creative and a great way for us to get insights into these characters. I know the Internet Sherelle recently released Relic, which I mean we've all been waiting for. I'm actually making myself wait to read it because I do have two more mic checks. I already have Aura, which I've received in the mail and I've started. But I also want to read Calm because I want to know the backstory of all these characters and I like to read in order. So once I receive Calm and I read it, then I'll read Relic. But I'm excited that it's out and I'm really looking forward to it. But with that, I ended up giving Saucy's story a read soon. Whew, this next one, stepping back into some other boys that I really appreciate and love their stories, some other men, brothers. And this one is urban fiction, urban romance, but it continues the series, the Porter Brothers series from On Us. But this one is Wreckless Love by Nina. And here we get to see more into Rec and Gia. And I've actually always really liked them as a couple, even though it was clear that Rec had a lot of work to do and to figure out because he was putting hands on women, and that is never acceptable. So he had some things he needed to work through. And also, Gia, she had a drinking problem. It came out in some of the other books, and they just were toxic together, right? Codependent and toxic. So they needed to go separate ways and take a break. But here we really learn what happened, because Gia just kind of ghosted Rec. So it was like, what happened and what's the backstory? I will say, woo, Nina's freaking webbed a story here. I you got to go back to Front Street Porter, the first book. So if y'all skip that one and just read On Us, it's not going to be as clear. You got to go back to Front Street Porter to really understand all the connections. She really took it back with this. But I did enjoy it. I did have some frustrations early on, and I'll talk about them. But I did say, like, Gia's father is a tough piece of work that I couldn't deal with. There's so much trauma and pain here. So we understand why Gia is drinking the way that she is. I did say that the story gets better after you make it past the parts that were in other books. So like I said, I don't like to skip. So I like to know all of the information. I read all of the additional works outside of the main canon of books in the series. And so for this one, Nina does have the archives. And I felt like early on, a lot of the information was pulled from other books and the archives. And these are things that I had already read, like verbatim. Like she's just pulling text to like set the foundation here. So if you hadn't read those books, you would still have an understanding of the whole story here. But for me, it was frustrating because I had read it and I was bored. But once I got past them and really got into the story, oh, I was in it. I also said that like sometimes I did feel like there were maybe arguably too many flashback scenes, but they did like make sense and give context to Gia and Rex's background and the experiences that they've had and why their bond is so tight, even though it's sometimes unhealthy. And so Rex really had to grow. And so, because at one point there's situations where they're talking about women and Rex is like, she act like a man, so I'm gonna treat her like one. I always feel like that's toxic and problematic and just an excuse for abuse and never acceptable. And it was pissing me off. But I did say Rex has been blowing me since Front Street Porter, book one, with his abusive tendencies. I didn't, I never found it acceptable. Women, I get that it's fiction, but Rex had been bothering me since the very beginning with that. When you read the book, I said I knew that was going to be Amir's secret. Amir is connected to Gia. I don't want to give too much away, but I saw that coming. I also felt like Naja, that whole situation was just crazy and she needed to be handled way earlier. She just had way too much dip on her chip. And I did like how that got resolved. I said that overall, surprisingly, this book actually ended up being my second favorite in the series. I said comically, I feel like this one needed an epilogue. And that's funny because sometimes I feel like epilogues are cheat codes. It's a nice way to put a bow on a story. But I sometimes think that we need to see the legwork. And here we end in a place that's a good place. But I wanted to see the future. I wanted to see Gia and Rec be parents. But I said overall, I think Nina did a good job stringing it all together because even though they were one of my favorite couples, I couldn't see how they would find their way back to each other just because of where things were. I just didn't see the path back. And so this story took me on that journey and I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I was missing my Porter brothers and this like scratched that itch for me. It was a great way to get me back into the story, into the like fold with the people, and I really appreciated it. And for that reason, I ended up giving this a read soon. All right, this next book was a different type of read for me, but y'all, I feel like more people need to be talking about this book. I've heard a little bit of chatter about it, but nowhere near enough. And the book I'm talking about is Just Right by Sean. And this we have the story of a woman who is lost in the woods and she really can't find her way back. She's trying and she ends up on a completely other side. It's dark. She's hungry. She's like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna break into this lake house that I always see from the other side. And I'm just going to rest for a little bit. I'm gonna charge my phone. I'm going to maybe get a little something to eat, but then I'm gonna head back out. She also plans to leave a note so she could play the people back, but she ends up falling asleep. She decides to take a nap, but she falls asleep. And when she awakes, there are three men, and one of them has a gun to her head because what are you doing in our house? And so, with this, we go on this journey. I will say this is a why choose book, the first one I've really read, and I am a fan. But I did say the first chapter did a good job of setting the pace and keeping me intrigued. I was like, because of the synopsis, I knew what was going to unfold. So I was like looking forward to that. But the story and the journey that we went on, I didn't anticipate. It is a very spicy book. And I feel like Sean did such a good job with it, actually. Like there's so many different type of like sex scenes and intimacy. But like I was never bored. And it's something that could have been cliche, but she did a great job of making it seem authentic and you really felt the emotions that the characters were having. But outside of the spice, I also really enjoyed the background and the story that was happening, learning about our characters and their desires for their life and the life that they wanted to have and how they supported each other and how they got here. I love complex human stories because I think life is messy and complex and sometimes complicated. And so I love stories that demonstrate that. Like it's not just simple, right? Because life is rarely just that simple. It can be very simple, but sometimes when it comes to emotions and partnerships, it's rarely just that simple. And so I really enjoyed that here. There were a couple of things that bothered me. For one, her spelling come like cum as come like come here COME bothered me. I said it was jolting and it was taking me out of the spicy moments a little bit. I also really did not like men's cum being described as ropes. Like she did that for like the first half and it bothered me every time. It bothered me every time. It was unsettling. But besides that, I really ended up enjoying it. I have already downloaded the next book in the Bliss Peak series, which is Seeing Red. I am very early in that, so nothing to say about that. But I've been recommending this book to all of my friends. And so I definitely, if you like spicy, this is definitely the one. Even if you don't like spicy, I highly recommend it. And I love the cover. I love that the cover is so misleading. It seems so innocent. When I tell you, you have no idea what this book is going to be about based on the cover, you are in for a ride. And I greatly enjoyed it. I ended up giving this book a read soon. All right, continuing with the romance, we have a modern one that, well, these are all modern, but we have one that just came out. We have the final book in the Skyland series where we finally talk about my girl Hendrix. We learn her story, and that is Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan. I got it the day before it released in the mail. I was so excited. It also came with my book bowl. So I have a book bowl for all three of the books. That also makes me very excited. But getting into it, so here we get Hendrix's story, right? And I loved it because Hendrix has always been my favorite. I love women who live life on their own terms. I just do. When you have so many societal pressures and expectations and standards to be this thing, and you choose to buck all of them and do what really makes you happy. I love that. And I know a lot of people have been DNFing this book, which I think is wild. And based on my reading of it, I feel like that's probably why. I feel like a lot of people are a little resistant to stories about women who live lives on their own terms. Just my personal stance. People may have different frustrations. But overall, I loved getting a deeper glimpse into Hendrix's life. I felt like we got little glimpse of her in Soul's book and Yasmin's book. But here we open up with seeing her going home, and we really see the struggles of her having a mother with Alzheimer's and just the challenges and what that means for her emotionally, physically, having me back and forth between Atlanta and then her hometown and what that all has meant. We also, obviously, this is a romance, so we get to see Hendrix find love here. I did say that multiple point of view is one of my favorites in general, and we do have that here between Hendrix and her love interest. But I did say I don't always like I like when we do a multiple point of view if it's going from one character to the next character. But sometimes we would have the same character for multiple chapters. And initially I'm like, huh, because I would want to know what was going on with the other character. But I always still enjoyed those as well. I felt like Hendrix was pissing me off a little bit. But you have to understand where she's coming from, just her experiences with men and just being free and not really having been in a lot of relationships. But I felt like she was kind of blocking her own blessings a little bit. But I understood the precarious situation that she was in. But like I said, I'm someone in life who believes that it can be messy and it can be murky, and I'm going to make the decision that feels truest to me. So she was applying girl code where I just didn't feel like it made sense. And I don't want to give too much of the book away, but like I said, she was upsetting me because there were also points where I was like, "Girl, y'all are already in it. Like you're trying to backtrack and you're already in the mess. You can't make it unmessy or make it less murky because here you are. Just live your life." Is what how I felt reading it. And eventually we do get there. I did say that, it's a romance, but I felt like it was so much more than that. I felt like there were elements about so many real world events in our modern times and the future of this nation and what we've seen, especially when we see Hendrix going to trial. And, at the end, Kennedy Ryan does tell us that's based on real events, but I remember when that lawsuit was happening in real time. So when I was reading it, I had already gotten that comparison. And I liked that we didn't get a resolution to that, but I love that Hendrix had a support system along the way. I greatly enjoyed watching our girl flourish, learning more about her and the work that she does. And I really, really loved the storyline with their assistants. That could definitely get a spin-off book, and I would read it. I really, really enjoyed that. Thought it was so good, so entertaining. I will say that I found more typos here than usual, and I did find that to be a bit alarming and annoying, just because this was something that was traditionally published. So I am presuming that you had editors, and I just felt like I can't believe they missed so many of those. But overall, I really enjoyed the work. I felt like it was a good closing to the series. I felt like Hendrix got the love that she deserved, the love that we are rooting for. It made we all find billionaires. But even more than that, more than him being a billionaire, he was just a rich person, like rich spirit, rich mentally, rich in so many ways. And I love the backstory with him, his father, and him wanting to buy what he was buying and why. And I love how it all worked out. I love when people are strategic in making things happen. And so I really felt like that was a love that Hendrix deserved. I felt like it was two boss babes coming together. And I love that because, sometimes when you are so successful in this one area, people are like, oh, you need like more of a supporting person. And it's like, maybe, but I also might need another boss, someone who really understands what I'm going through and someone who isn't in their ego or isn't intimidated or does not have these preconceived notions or limitations on what women should be able to do. Loved it. Really enjoyed it actually. Overall, I gave this a read soon. It's one of my favorites in the series. I can't decide for myself if I love this one or Before I Let Go More, but really enjoy them both. So I definitely recommend that y'all check it out. All right, this next book, another pleasant surprise. This one was actually requested by one of my subscribers. They wrote it and they wanted me to read it. So I said that I would, and I finally did. This one is Chateau Lafite with a Side of Maple Syrup by Terrence Shockley. Hopefully, I'm saying that correctly. And this one is actually another romance, but our main characters, for the most part, are older. And I love that because we don't often get that enough. And I will say, initially, the story didn't go where I thought it would go, but I actually really enjoyed this. Surprise! It was surprising to me how much I enjoyed it. But this story, we are in Chicago and we have a young woman who is at the gym and she's working out next to this older man. And she thinks that he's very attractive and very alluring and maybe a good fit for her mother. And so she's working on trying to play that angle. This man is very aloof, but people are drawn to him because he's very attractive. And so we have her, and she also has her own issues going on, right? One, she wants her mother to be happy. She's trying to think of a love interest for her, but also she's engaged, right? Or actually, she's not engaged. She has a long term boyfriend at this point. Eventually, they become engaged. And so they have that storyline. Now, her fiance is also someone who's very successful, but similar to her, he has a mother who is older, but is a model, is a former model who has started her own modeling agency and has everything in the world going for her. And he sees this same man that his fiance sees. They don't ever speak about this, but sees him at this, I want to say it's a bakery or a cafe. I'm not 100% sure, but at another business that he owns. And he's like, man, he might be a good someone for my mom. Eventually, both of these women end up dating this man. No one has, I will say this, no one has agreed to exclusivity, and he is very straightforward and honest about this. And so they're both dating him unbeknownst to either of them. And that takes us on this journey. We also have other storylines happening with the kids. They're adults, but with these two women's children that are also engaged. And then also this man and his daughter, who is a up and coming successful model. But this story, I'm even trying to think of how to explain this to you all. This story goes on just like it has a major twist that I didn't see coming, but I was here for. I said I love the aspect of an adult dating experience. I really felt like the writing grows stronger as the story progresses. But as far as the adult dating romance experience, I felt like we got to see a lot of romance and old school courting, which I think is something that is definitely needed. I miss it sometimes in our romance reads, just like old school courting, taking your time, really flowing and figuring it out. And I really appreciated that. I just felt like the story ended up being really good and where it went. I was like, it was a twist, but I was here for it. I actually want to know more about the children and how everything played out with them. And so I actually really ended up enjoying this romance. Now, with that, I did have some flaws that I want to discuss. I did say I'm not sure if the cover works. I think the cover is striking. I think it's very beautiful. I ended up getting the title after I read the book, but I just think that at first glance, you don't really know what you're walking into. But the cover is striking. And I know a lot of people who've seen it think that it's very beautiful. And so it works. I'm just not sure it does a good job of pulling the reader in and getting them to want to engage with the story. Like if I had just seen the cover, I don't know if it would have like drew me in because it doesn't tell me what the story is about. And so that was a thing that I was thinking through. I also did sometimes feel like the Spanish was inconsistent when it was used here. Because sometimes it would go from Dominican shorthand to like very standard and like proper Spanish. And so I wanted some consistency there. And I think the big thing for me was like toward the end, I felt like sometimes the heavier conversations that needed to happen between the adults didn't occur. I said sometimes it felt like the writer was glazing over the challenging conversations, and I didn't like that. Another thing for me was that I felt like Mason is almost a static character. Mason is the older man that like everyone is drawn to and is dating both of these women. I felt like he had a constant state of composure. But I wanted to see Mason a little unsettled sometimes and not always be completely in control. And we get a little bit of that when the big action scene transpires, but I wanted more of it. And like I said, by the end of the book, I wanted to know more. I was invested in these characters. I wanted to know where this journey was going. I don't want to tell y'all what that is because I do want y'all to read it. I was like, where is this going to end up? Like, someone else had got roped in. I think why choose is becoming one of my favorite genres. And there are why choose elements here. But I wanted to know what happened with the main couple. I also wanted to know what was going on with the children. I said they could get their own series. And I also felt like this must be book one in a series. There has to be a series coming because of how everything wrapped up. But I really, really enjoyed this book. If more books come out in the series, I definitely plan to check them out. And I would recommend the same for you all. And so with that, I ended up giving this book a read soon. All right, that is all of the romance reads that I have, which is the bulk of what I read in April and May. But, I'm trying to make sure I read some of my other books as well that are not just romance. And so, with that, I am now moving into nonfiction. And so the first book that we have for nonfiction is Message to the People by Marcus Garvey. And this is essentially everything Marcus Garvey wants Black people to know as far as his rules for life for Black people, essentially. I will say that early on in this book, I was like, this is propaganda, just based on reading it. And then there's a chapter on propaganda, and Marcus Garvey agrees with me that it is propaganda, but it's the best type of propaganda. And it's propaganda to combat white propaganda, which has taught Black people that they are inferior and that they should hate themselves. And thinking of the history and the context of that time, but even in modern times, that is so important. So we get so much here just on understanding money and how that should operate, treating people well, the knowledge that we should have of self, coming together, politics. There's just so many elements, and Marcus Garvey gives his stance on it. Did I always agree? No, but did I feel like there was value at? Absolutely. One thing that I really ended up walking away from this is that I went and I listened to Marcus Garvey, some of his speeches on YouTube. I'm actually going to put one in the description for you all to check out. But I was like, have you all actually listened to Marcus Garvey speak? He's a very like charismatic speaker. And I said that he was preaching. So in the book, there are parts when he was hitting and I like understood. And I was like, he is really preaching that. And it comes across in the oration of a preacher, even when you're reading it. And so listening to him speak, I was like, yeah, he was a preacher. He was preaching. That's what you get. But just very, very charismatic. I could see why so many people admired him and followed along what he was saying. Definitely made sense. I did feel as if I got a deeper knowledge of what Marcus Garvey stood for by reading this book. I had in my notes, I said, as a Malcolmite, which I identify as, and that's someone who is learned and knowledgeable and follows a lot of the teachings of Malcolm X. I felt like obviously I had been impacted by the lessons of Garvey because Malcolm X, his father was a significant Garveyite and really followed that and taught that to Malcolm. And Malcolm got exposed to that in an early age. So that was something that had always stuck with him. So I felt like just based on that connection, there was also elements of Garveyism in Malcolm X's teaching. And so I felt like I knew a little bit from that, but reading this was definitely a different experience. And I felt like I got a deeper understanding. And so I don't always feel like it applies to our modern times because things are so different, but people don't change, right? History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but people do. And so people have been the same throughout history, just to different scale, in my opinion. So I feel like a lot of the lessons were still important here, and I was glad that I read it. Now, for me personally, I am someone who has kind of been obsessed with learning Black history since I was 11. And so a lot of this I felt like I had gotten from other people in different ways. So I didn't necessarily feel like I had learned a lot of new information, but I did feel as if for some people this could be a really good value add. It may definitely be transformative. But I still enjoyed it, still was excited to say that I read this because this is the only kind of book that has Marcus Garvey's curriculum for the school that he had started and attended for the education of Black people. This is the only thing that he's written in that way. And so to read it from his mouth and from his perspective rather than what someone else would summarize, right? I think that's a big thing with American history. Like sometimes we don't always have those firsthand accounts, right? We're reading it, those secondhand experiences or secondhand understandings. And so to have this first person account, I thought was really good. And I'm glad that I read it. And I think that others should read it. But just based on what I walked away with, I did end up giving it a read when you have time. But like I said, for someone else, I think it could definitely be higher. And I definitely think everyone should read it. So the next nonfiction work that I read is actually a study and not a book, but I will put the link in the description as well. This is The Broken Promise of Brown versus the Board of Education. And this really talks about how school segregation still exists. I am someone who has spent my life working in education in one way or another, and for the equity and equality of education for all, and for everyone to have access to a high quality education. And I know from personal experience how life changing education can be and how it can completely shift the trajectories of someone's life, and how throughout history, many people have used education to climb the ladder of success and change their entire family's socioeconomic status. And so I think it's so important in these modern times when so many people have so many different stances and opinions on public education and what it means. And we talk about school choice and all of these things. I think that everyone should be aware of what's happening in the school system, what options actually exist, especially if you're a parent. But even if you're not a parent, we all know young people, right? We have nieces, nephews, cousins, adopted children, whatever, right? Where we really need to be concerned with the current state of our education system. And so I feel like everyone should read this. I feel like it really was doing a good job of making sure it's clear about denial based on where you live, how that is just another form of redlining, right? And segregation, how priority is given to wealthier families, and even at magnet schools that are designed to be opportunities for the poor, how you sometimes still see those same cycles and shortcomings and lack of options, right? Also, it does a good job of talking about how disabled students don't always get served and don't always have the services that they need, and what can be done about that, and how sometimes opportunities aren't given to those who need it, so just so folks can say that seats are full or not really give the options for families, right? And there's not always proof that's required for that. And so making sure that folks are really aware of how these lottery systems work and how they can just advocate for themselves and their families. A direct quote says Brown versus Board of Education was a narrow ruling in that it only outlawed school assignment based explicitly on race. Federal law still allows school assignment schemes that rely on variables that correlate with race, such as an address or income level. And a system based primarily on geography will, by default, end up excluding most low income children from attending the best public schools. So I thought it was insightful. Definitely think it's something folks should check out. Obviously, don't base your knowledge on one article, right? Don't base it on one study. Definitely be broad in your understanding. But I think this is one example of what's currently happening that I thought would be beneficial. And so for that reason, I have this as a read soon. So those were the nonfiction books. Now we're going to go into children's books that I read. So the first children's book that I read was one that I was so excited about the release. It is City Summer, Country Summer by Kia State Layman. And is a story that essentially we follow a young child on his journey in Mississippi from New York and what it's like to be there. We also see from the other children their experience and interaction with him and what it all means, what is said and what is gone unsaid, right? I felt like the sentiment was there here, but I felt like the story needed more time to cook. I felt like there were a lot of ideas that were there at a very cursory level, and I wish we could have had more. I understood that it was a children's book, but I enjoy children's books. I think a lot can be done with them. And so I feel like the story was like ideas without the flesh that we needed for it to really be a full figure. And so I felt like the illustrations were gorgeous. I thought there were beautiful illustrations in the book. And I thought that the sentiment and what that book could have been was here, but I didn't feel like it fully connected. And so for that reason, I ended up giving this a read when you have time. But I love Kiese. I appreciate his works and his writings. And so I'm still going to continue to read him. I know this was his first delving into a children's book, and I think that the potential is still here. But I did feel as if, moving forward, I would want to see the ideas more fully formed. All right, the next book that I read for children is Tales of Mauritius by Sings Patel and Sebastian Pallone. This is one I actually picked up when I went to Mauritius a few years ago. And this is a series of short, like fables. When reading it, I really thought of it like Aesop's fables, where they're like cute and enjoyable stories that have tales of mischief and crafty resolutions. But they're fun, and I think they're really great stories for children with like a message behind them, something to make you think and ponder. I actually really enjoyed it as an adult, so I felt like it's one that anyone and everyone could read. I really remember like liking Aesop's fables as a child, or one of my favorite was like The People Who Could Fly. And so this felt very familiar for me. It felt very reminiscent of childhood and brought me back to those happy and warm memories. And I just thought it was one that like everyone can get something from it. And so for that reason, I ended up giving this a read now. We're now done with the nonfiction, and you all know that I have a shelf of comic books and graphic novels that I want to read more of. And so, for that reason, I ended up taking The Sacrifice of Darkness off the shelf. That's by Roxane Gay and Tracy Lynn Oliver. And this is actually a continuation story. So I'll link my review up in the cards, but it's actually based on the story We Are the Sacrifice of Darkness from the book Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. Y'all know I loved that book of short stories. Definitely, there are some stories that I wish had been expanded upon or could be whole books. One was about the twins. Another one was this one that I found really interesting. So I really did like the concept of them taking it and turning it into a graphic novel and even going beyond what we knew from that story. And so here I said it's an interesting twist on the story by recognizing what happens after the father. The miner drives his ship to the sun and swallows it whole. I felt like it also demonstrates human behavior and how people can change, right? That was a big thing for me. I said, what intrigues me is that humans haven't changed much over time, right? So this is written through a different point in history, and people start off, kind of just trying to figure out what happened. As it becomes clear, they start pointing fingers. Eventually, those fingers become forms of like weapons, whether that's through law or wanting to do physical harm, to actually like bully this one specific family, the miner's family. And we're here with his son and his wife who are left behind to deal with the consequences of his actions and the public outfall, right? I also felt like from my readings from religious texts to contemporary books, I felt like humans are humans through and through, and at the core, like character and motivations have not changed throughout history. That's why I say I think people are people, just in different forms. and arguably like haven't really evolved. um, I think the six situations and circumstances change, but I think humans are humans. But I say that people eventually become unkind and cruel in this book, blaming the high towers for the sun no longer being in the sky. I feel like we get the backstory of how Mara and Hiram fell in love. That was the couple. We eventually get the story of Joshua, their son, and Claire, how they find each other and develop a friendship that eventually evolves into something different, and how they make mining sound so beautiful. In this book, that was a thing. It was like people uncovering things, new discoveries, and I hadn't really conceptualized it that way. And so, for me, I'm not one who's a big fan of caves. So I've gone into some, for history and to see, but it can feel very claustrophobic for me. But for people to be in there and to think of it as like this beautiful opportunity to discover new things and find jewels and gems, I thought it was written very nice, and made me think of it differently. And so overall, I thought that it ended up being a very sweet story that I was glad that I had read. I really enjoyed it. And so I ended up giving this a read soon. I will say that for April and May, as you all can see, I had a pretty solid 2 months of reading. Most of my books ended up being read soon. I didn't have a read if you want, so it was nothing that completely put me off, but it was really solid. Reading a few different books right now. I've mentioned a couple of them. But yeah, I am in the middle of quite a number of books, and we'll see which ones, take precedent and which ones hold my attention. And maybe you all will hear about them when I do my June wrap up. But the next video that you all will probably see from me is like the June releases that are coming out. So I'm excited to talk about those. Let me know if y'all agree with where I put these books. Let me know if y'all have read these books. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know what you're looking forward to coming out. Just let me know everything that's going on with you book wise. But that's it for me as of right now. As always, I'm Shay. The channel is Miss Malcolm Hughes, one where we believe that books are sometimes better than people. And until the next one, I hope that you all remember to give time, to be kind to yourselves and to each other. And as the weather changes, I hope that you get outside and enjoy it. That's it for me. I will catch you all in the next one.